Hello, and welcome to one more chapter with me, Kay Alleena, and my cat Zelda. So today, one of my friends in the creative writing department, Ryan, said it was World Book Day, which I didn't know. So in celebration of books, of course, because this is a booktube channel, I'm going to do the tag that I saw on Bookables, which kind of started me wanting to do my own channel. So the tag is called Trip Down Memory Lane. I saw it from Bookables' channel, and it was originally from Becca the Book Reviewer. So I'll link to both of their channels in the description as soon as this video is over. So it comes in 8 parts. So the first one is, what is the first novel you remember reading? Well, when I was younger, all I did was read. I was reading those like picture book type, next step above picture books, kind of not quite YA, not quite middle grade, just above that, reading like 10 of those a week. You couldn't stop me from reading. I was 5 or 6, early elementary school, and that was my favorite thing in the entire universe to do, was to read. I would sit in the sand dunes, even though the water was right there and the beach was great, and just read all the time for summer camp. So at the time I was obsessed with, and go ahead and laugh, movies like The Last Unicorn or, you know, The Neverending Story, really corny 80s movies. I mean, but they were great. They were kind of what started me like wanting to read more of this fantasy stuff, more to read about the dragons and the witches and wizards and unicorns, obviously. So when I found out that The Neverending Story was actually a book by Michael Ende, I had to read it. Now, I don't remember whether it was my mom or my grandma that bought the book for me. Maybe my grandpa had it. But I had to read it. They handed it to me and said, "You're not going to be able to finish it. You can come to us if you need more help." I proved them wrong. I read this book in like a week. I ate this up. I would not stop reading it. It was great. It was great. I mean, this isn't the original copy that I had. I lost that a long time ago. But, I mean, it's great. This kind of started me wanting to read more fantasy novels. Now, I'm pretty sure this does qualify as a kid's book, but, you know, reading it again after I've gotten a little bit older, I noticed that it's pretty meta. All right, and I can kind of look back and realize why I loved it so much. Your main character is this like nerdy kid named Bastion, who all he did was read, and he got picked on for that. And one day he walks into a shop and finds a magic book, and the bookstore owner is talking about it like it's the greatest thing in the world. Of course, he knew this, and he ends up taking it and skipping all of his classes. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that now just to read? Skipping all of his classes, and he finds out as he's reading that he's influencing the fantasy world story, that he, because he believes in these things and he's reading this book, is saving a fantasy world. Now, that is something that I could not get enough of. I loved this book when I was little. But that said, it is not the first book that I fell in love with. Part 2, the first book you fell in love with, is The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Okay? I think if you guys had seen my intro video, you might know the story already, but I'll go ahead and repeat it. When I was 7 years old, my uncle handed me a copy of The Hobbit and said, "One day this will be important to you." And it was the first book that made me want to write. I remember reading this book and then picking 13 of my classmates who I didn't talk to because I was too busy reading, just FYI, and writing little adventures where we would all just like completely be absorbed in this world, and I was always the wizard, of course. We'll get to that later, though. This is still really important for me today. Tolkien is one of my heroes. All of the Lord of the Rings books and the Hobbit books and the Silmarillion, they're super inspiring to me. We'll just leave it at that. That's a whole nother video by itself. The Hobbit was the first book that I fell in love with, and I mean, if you want more proof, I have another copy on my shelf right up there. I have another copy in the living room, and I have this like gilded one that I got when the first movie came out, just before it was in theaters. So I mean, it's important to me. It's still important to me, and I read it once a year. Usually at New Year's. This is the first time I crack it open. Doesn't matter what book I'm in the middle of. It's important. So this is the first book I fell in love with, and I'm still in love with this book. Number 3 is your favorite children's storybook. Well, I don't have a copy of it anymore, of course. My mom probably does because I was the kind of kid that would draw and write in the margins of books. But one of my favorite storybooks was Swimmy by Leo Leone. So it was, I think, back in the day, I was really obsessed with art and pretty things, and I could read this book. There wasn't very much to the actual, like, writing part, but I could read this book by myself. And I might have been 4, 5-ish. That's when I guess I would say is when I started reading. 3, 4, 5-ish. So I had this book. It was destroyed, but I remember that I had got it at one of those Scholastic Book Fair things. It was destroyed by the time I saw it last. I think it was a few years ago. Mom was going through her birthday card briefcase and things like that with all the important papers, and there's this book to me with all of my handwriting, and it was super cute. And she said, well, this is the book that you read almost every single day, besides, you know, the Foot book by Dr. Seuss. Like, who didn't have Dr. Seuss, though? But Swimmy with this little fish, and it was just, apparently I also had a bookmark that I destroyed that went with it. And I was obsessed with it. We did live on Cape Cod. We were by the water. So, of course, anything that had to do with the sea was probably really cool for such a little kid. So, yeah, that was my favorite children's storybook as far as I can remember. Okay, so for number 4, the first book you became obsessed with, again, The Hobbit. I mean, you might have heard from the way I rambled on before for the second tag. I'm still obsessed with this book. Like I said, I read it once a year, every year, without fail. I have a few different copies with a whole bunch of different covers, and it's just a good book. I love it. I mean, people critique it and say that there's no women in it, but back in the day, it didn't really bother me, especially when I was starting to write my own versions of it. I would cast myself and my friends who were women and girls, and we were fine with that. And now as I look at it, yes, so it's strange that there are no women in it. But we can critique that when I review this book. I'm still obsessed with it. The fact that I even want to critique it means I'm still obsessed with it. We'll talk more about this maybe in my first book review, officially. So, number 5 is the first book that taught you something about yourself. Oh, this is a funny one. So You Want to Be a Wizard by Diane Duane. Okay, so I was telling you about how I used to write stories where I was the wizard. Alright, so here's another fun fact about me. I'm a pagan. So of course I wanted to be a wizard. I didn't quite know how to put that. I was maybe 10 when I read this for the first time. I wanted witchcraft and wizardry to be real. I was reading Harry Potter at the same time too. So when I found this book, kind of like how Nita in this book finds it, I really wanted it to be real. And part of my brain started saying, well, why not? Why can't it be real? This is a really well done book, and their version of wizardry is way different than the Harry Potter books. So if you hadn't read this and you do love the Harry Potter books, you probably should start this series. So the next one is a book you will always remember reading for the first time. That's going to be Artemis Fowl. This is another YA fantasy book, and I remember reading this one because it's short, and everyone had been talking about it. Older kids. Oh, this is a great book. You should read this one. You should read this one. I mean, I've had this copy for a long time. It's starting to get yellow now, but when I was elementary school, this is, I think it was elementary school. It doesn't matter when, but I was really young, and I read this one for the first time, and I had to read the rest of the series. As they came out, we had pre-ordered books for these. Like, I think this was the first series that we had pre-ordered books. I was obsessed. I could not put these down. Again, this is another magical world, and it's a little bit different from, you know, Harry Potter, from, you know, The Hobbit. This ran along the same sort of lines as the book I read later, So You Want to Be a Wizard. So this is another good one. This is another favorite. I still have it, and I do recommend it to young people who are starting to read YA and starting to read fantasy books. It's really well done. Okay, let's see. The first classic you read. It's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. And I might not have read this one for myself. I feel like this was one where either the teachers or my parents had read to me. and maybe not entirely as it was written. Maybe it was sort of told to kind of sum up the story, because it is a classic and it's a little bit wordier than what little kids in the United States would have had been reading, considering, like I said in the beginning, I was reading those like picture book type things that are just a step above picture books but not quite, you know, to YA fiction or anything like that. So yeah, and that leads to the last one. The first book to movie adaptation you saw was really, people say Harry Potter, people say, you know, the Hobbit, if you want to talk about the silly cartoon version, but really for me it was Alice in Wonderland. We were a Disney family. We had a copy of that one on VHS, and before I even remember even hearing the story of Alice in Wonderland, I had seen that book, and technically that's the first book to movie adaptation I had seen, so yeah. That being said, happy World Book Day, really. Take some time to go through your shelf to see what sort of stuff was your favorite when you were younger. Be a little reflective. Find out how these books relate to how you're reading and writing today, if that's the sort of thing that you do. And see if anything has changed, whether some of the books that you're going to list are really still favorites, have affected you in some significant way that you don't realize. For me, most of these books kind of shaped who I would be as a reader and as a writer. Had I not ever read The Hobbit, I'm not sure that I would be sitting right here today filming a show for you guys. Had I not read So You Want to Be a Wizard, I might not have picked up a couple of books on paganism when I was a little bit older. Had I not read The Neverending Story, I might not have realized, you know, there's so much more to reading and writing than, well, especially reading, than we realize. I wouldn't have understood, you know, that imagination, as it were, was so powerful. And had I not read Alice in Wonderland, I might not have known what lies through the looking glass, what's on the other side, what more we can write about. Everything is not just this reality. And I mean, growing up as a pagan, growing up as a person who was obsessed with fantasy writing, it's important, at least to me, that we remember, at least I remember these books that I loved when I was a kid and why I love them and who I became because of I read them. And I think, especially for those of you who are reading and reviewing YA books, like those are really impressionable years. When you read books like that, you're going to end up like changing in some way. It sounds really corny, that's why I hesitated, but it's true, you're going to change in some way. If I had read something else, I don't know what I would be doing right now. Everything kind of has its way, everything has a purpose and a reason, and it kind of is amazing to go back to this and listen to myself even talk about how much I have changed and who I've become because of these earliest books that I had been reading. But yeah, so I'm just gonna sign off again with saying, like, The Hobbit still is my favorite book. It has influenced me the most out of all of these on the list, and pick some of your old favorites and pass them on to people you think might need them. How about we do that for World Book Day? Pass on the books that made the most difference to you and see, you know, how they can help somebody around you. Alright, well, thank you for watching, and if you want to, hit the subscribe button in the corner, and I'll be back next week with a new video.